Good. So we'll start over. Welcome on YouTube Live. Sorry about the audio problems. Daniel chapter 5. We're going to immediately go into our 3 Bible study steps. We're going to work through this process in the chapter. Step 1, look at it. Step 2, think about it. Step 3, do it. Observation, interpretation, application. Step 1, you mark it up. Just observe what's there. Step 2, you ask questions and get answers to find the truth principles, true for everyone everywhere. And then in step 3, you write an application statement, apply it to today. Bible Island, cross the bridge, truth principle bridge to today. So that's our Bible study method for the Daniel Master Class. Now we're in Daniel chapter 5. So just to bring us up to the story of Daniel through 1 through 5, Daniel's been kidnapped. He's a prisoner of war. He's brought from Israel to Babylon, where he has become, where it is his new home. He rises in reputation from a teenager to a young adult to an adult, and he's served King Nebuchadnezzar first. King Nebuchadnezzar's entire term lasted 20, 30, 40 years, and Daniel was a big part of that, gained reputation and prestige as he interpreted dreams, as he walked with faith in uncertain times. And as we saw in chapter 4, one of the main characters is Nebuchadnezzar. His arc, his storyline ends in chapter 4, and he goes from completely pagan, believing in many gods, to, at the end of chapter 4, lifting his eyes to the God Most High. And is strong, more than he was introduced to God by Daniel in chapter 1 when he refused to eat the king's food. He included God Most High amongst other gods. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he saw God in the fire. And then in this last chapter, he invited God. He became someone who placed God in his proper position, God Most High, after being humbled. He became a follower of God Most High at the end of chapter 4. Now, chapter 5 is not the end of Nebuchadnezzar's story. Chapter 5 is a continuation of Nebuchadnezzar's story because we're introduced to a new character, and it's the second king in Nebuchadnezzar's, in Daniel's life. It's King Belshazzar. Daniel's name is Belteshazzar, and this king's name is Belshazzar. If I got, one has a T and one doesn't. Belshazzar. So King Belshazzar in chapter 5. King Belshazzar is Nebuchadnezzar's son. Nebuchadnezzar, the most successful king of Babylon, at its highest peak, at its most power, at its most prestige. He built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Now his son has taken over, and Nebuchadnezzar has passed from the scene. Daniel chapter 5, in the first part of the story, Belshazzar is throwing a party, and in the midst of the party, he grabs the vessels from the Hebrew temple, and he's using them to party with. The cups, the goblets, the plates, the statues, whatever else might be, he's using them. Now, this is not a small slight. This is very intentional. This is very cultural. It's very disrespectful, and basically it's blaspheme. And so he is knowingly blaspheming the God of the Hebrews by grabbing these vessels. He's making a public statement. This isn't just he picked up the wrong silver cup and drank it. This is a deliberate act of defiling something that represented the God of the Hebrews. So the party in and of itself is just full of debauchery, and I just was looking forward to using the word debauchery. The act of bringing in the vessels, the holy vessels, blasphemy, and it's during this party that the way the story is described, a giant hand floats in, bigger than a normal hand, and writes on the wall in the party. So Daniel chapter 5 is where we get the saying, the writing is on the wall. How many of you guys have heard that before? The writing's on the wall. Give us like what's a modern day paraphrase when you hear the phrase, the writing's on the wall? What does that typically represent in today's lingo? Why would somebody say that today? Anyone have it? Ralph?
It's a done deal.
Yeah. Any other ways that you take that? I mean, Jeremy.
The future's set.
Yep. It's finished. It's over. Writing's on the wall. It's done. That building's going to be demolished. The writing's on the wall. You know, it's literally just a matter of time until this thing ends. There's nothing else we can do. The writing's on the wall. It's over. Because of Daniel chapter 5. So the hand comes in and writes, and we'll talk about the translation in a second, but basically says it's over. And what it is God Most High is saying to this king, your time's up. You've crossed the line. You're finished. And in the story, when the handwriting's on the wall, it's in a language that nobody knew. So Belshazzar had to find an interpreter, and that's when he's reminded about the character of Daniel. And so Daniel is not a part of Belshazzar's court, immediate court. He's been demoted. He's been set to the side. He was probably one of his father's people, and he's probably transitioned a lot of those people. And Daniel wasn't important to Belshazzar. He had forgot about him. I think in chapter 5, I think it's Belshazzar's mother, maybe, the queen. So Belshazzar's wife is who reminds him of Daniel. Daniel comes in, and this is what's interesting about chapter 5. What Daniel does is he retells the story of chapter 4. Belshazzar, do you remember when your dad went crazy for 7 seasons? He was high, he was proud, and he was brought down and made like an animal, and he ate from the grass, and his hair grew really long, and his nails grew really long, and he was humiliated. He lost his senses. Do you remember that? Daniel tells that story in chapter 5. So in verse 13, Daniel comes into the scene. Verse 19, and because of the greatness that he gave him, all the peoples and nations and languages trembled before him. So Nebuchadnezzar was great, but he was given to him by God. Who he killed, he killed. Who he would keep alive. Who he would raise up, he would raise up. Who he would humble would be humbled. And when his heart lifted up, his spirit was hardened, so that he dealt proudly. He was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. Do you remember this? It's basically what he's bringing to them. Verse 22. Let's read 21. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like a beast. His dwelling was with the donkeys. He fed grass like an ox. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over who he will. And you, his son, verse 22, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all these. So this is not a new story. Belteshazzar was alive and well when it happened. He knows about it. This is simply basically a refresher. It's kind of like when that your friend or your story comes back in. You remember when this happened? You know it happened. You were there. You saw it. This is what happened. This is why it happened. And yet you didn't learn your lesson. Verse 23, you lifted up the vessels. You brought, this was it. This was the last straw. You brought these things in and you use them in a way. And you worship gods of gold and bronze and iron and wood and stone, which do not hear you. But the God whose hand holds your breath, in whose are all your ways, you have not honored. This is one of the incredible descriptions of God, in whose hand holds your breath. So the God of the universe holds your breath in your hands. We don't describe God as our breath holder, but he is the holder of our breath. And so when this is brought up, Belteshazzar's starting to understand the writing is on the wall. So then the interpretation of the dream, or of the writing, and basically the interpretation is in verse 26. The first word, mene, mene, it means God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. That's repeated twice. So God has numbered the days of your kingdom, brought it to an end. Remember, the theme of Daniel is God is the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, builds up kings and kingdoms, takes down kings and kingdoms. So Belshazzar, yours has been numbered and it's coming to an end. The second word, Tekel, you have been weighed and in balance and found wanting. So God is the numberer and God is the judge. God's the one who's the scales of justice are being weighed. God has weighed you, God has judged you and found you lacking. Usually we like being weighed and found lacking, but not in this case. And then in verse 28, the last word, Peres, your kingdom is divided and given amongst the Medes and Persians. This goes back to the dream where the statue was built, and out of the different irons and the rock came in and destroyed the statue. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon was the head, and the next one, of gold, the silver, would be the Medes and Persians. This is when that takes place. Belteshazzar dies that very night, and the Medes and Persians, King Darius, takes over. So it's no longer a Babylonian kingdom. The Medes and Persians now share the kingdom. It's divided basically. It was Babylonians, now it's Medes and Persians. That king becomes the king of Babylon, takes over all its wealth, and it's not as unified as before. It's now beginning to be less than it was, and Belteshazzar missed it. How would you like this to be the message that God writes about you when he brings up, you've been weighed and found wanting, and now it's night. So verse 30, that very night, Belteshazzar the Chaldean was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So that's the story. That's the observation part. We see what's there. We see the story. We see the characters. We see the writing on the wall, the interpretation. We have Darius. We have the vessels. We have Daniel. We have the queen. All of that takes place. So in stage number one, very interesting story. King Nebuchadnezzar is still a character in this story. And so what you observe is Nebuchadnezzar's reaction versus Belshazzar's reaction. King Nebuchadnezzar turns his eyes and his heart towards the God Most High. Belshazzar, seeing the same thing, turns his heart away from God Most High. And the consequences were dire. Nebuchadnezzar was blessed and he was given success after his humiliation. Belteshazzar lost his life and his kingdom. So that's the observation. Now, interpretation, why do we need to know this stuff? This is where you would do question and answer. Is anybody have any burning questions where there's something that you don't understand or making sense or you're wondering about from this? We won't spend a lot of time on question and answer tonight. because we're running a little late, but we'll jump right into topics unless there's a question that you guys have right off the bat. Going once, going twice. All right. Here's my question. What topics are here? So what are the topics that are being discussed? What are the what's being brought up? What are they talking about? What's chapter 5 about in topic language? We continue to have through the entire book of Daniel the supremacy of God. So God Most High. What other topics are here?
Well, I see the seriousness that God takes being blasphemous toward him.
Right. So the disrespect, blasphemy, disrespect of God. Now, culturally, and this is Bible Island versus our island, the vessels of God is not a thing. But it's an interesting question to ask yourself. What are ways that we could offend or disrespect God today? So if I wanted to really spit in the face of the God of the Bible, how would I do that today? And what does that carry? It's an interesting question. It's a topic that's here, and something that we won't investigate tonight, but you can challenge it. One of the straightforward answers is God's name, the way we use God's name, and we disrespect it. But yeah, any other topics that come up that jump out at you? There's several other ones, but
The one thing that comes to mind is those who know what to do and do not do it, for them it is sin. He had the example of his father.
right.
He knew right from wrong, and he chose a different path.
Yeah, and this is not ignorance, like leading to bad choices. This is deliberate, intentional disrespect on his part. So when God is weighing you and finds you wanting, whew. So we have judgment of God, we have power of God, idol worship comes up. So worshiping idols, whether it's iron, wood, bronze, gold, and or idol worship in our own lives. So again, we're starting to see how these things carry across the bridge. We may not have vessels of God, but we still have God. A truth principle would be God still demands respect, or God is still a jealous God. So that's true for everyone, everywhere, and every time. God is and always will be the judge of mankind, and we are judged by our actions. There is absolutely still the judgment of God that's real, and our hearts are going to be drawn away from God towards other idols, and we can start asking ourselves, what are some things that we worship? What are some lessons that we should have learned that we may not have learned, right? So that's learning the lessons of life. Those are a part of now starting to make this come home to you. It's an interesting story. It's great that we got the colloquialism writing on the wall from this. That's a good answer to a Jeopardy question. But how does it impact my life, my heart today? And so now seeing these topics, I can start to think, how do I disrespect God? What lessons, what maybe should I have learned or need to be reminded of that I'm turning away from? What possible idols am I worshiping in my life? So you can see yourself start wrestling with these, and again, there's other things in here, but those are probably the big heavy hitters of chapter 5. And then seeing God holding your breath, that to me, that's just that's what's jumping out at me as I'm rereading this even today. Like God as the breath holder, and Belteshazzar's breath was let go at this point. So now that's trying to interpret it, understand it, see the truth principles, and we see these principles about God himself, and what's true everywhere, every time. Now we take this final step and we completely ask the question, so what? What does this do for me? Now, last week, and I know our feed, 2 weeks ago, our feed was really, really choppy, but we made the point for every one truth, and the truth is the same for everyone everywhere. So the truth is not debatable. The interpretation of that truth is unique for everyone in every situation. So there are thousands and millions of applications to every one truth, because there's thousands and millions of people in different times and different circumstances. And so asking yourself the question now, how does this apply to me? Is there a lesson to learn? Is there a pattern to follow? Is there a command to hold on to? We're using the application statement as a tool to help us carry and change and do what the book of James says, not to just look in the mirror, but to look in the mirror and make the adjustments that we need to make. And so don't be hearers of the word, but be doers also. What does Daniel chapter 5 tell you to do? What's the call to action for you? What does it change? What does it transform? How do you grow? How are you different? And how is that going? How could that impact your immediate life now, today? So the application statement is got 4 parts to it. It's got time. When are you going to do this? It's got action. It's measurable. I can tell if I did a good or bad job. And it's personal. You're involved in it. So it takes a principle or a truth like God is the judge of mankind, and it takes that truth, and now I got to think about me, my person, and what action it causes me to take or not to take. So how do I ask the question? What's a possible thing that God might be saying to you through Daniel chapter 5? And maybe you don't have to put an application statement right this second, but just start kind of chewing on that and try to answer the question for you. So what? So what? So why does God want you to know this now? How does it encourage you, challenge you, apply to you in some way? So this is kind of a chew the fat kind of a question. You don't have to have everything lined up, but what are some possibilities of what God is saying to you? If you're listening on YouTube and you have my cell number, don't hesitate to text any responses that you have. Anybody have any thoughts?
So obviously there's a lot going on in this world right now, especially the past 2 weeks. And the truth statement in here of you saw what came before and you're not acting, your perspectives haven't changed. In fact, you've rejected that. And so I know I always haven't done a great job being graceful or understanding of what history is available for me to know in this time. So kind of framing some kind of application around that and just being more understanding and let that understanding lead to grace.
Oh yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't even think that's really interesting. So yeah, it would be you kind of like give yourself an assignment to learn the lessons that God has already taught, and whether it's family history or church history or world history, that's a really interesting thought. Yeah, that'll travel.
You not know it are doomed to repeat it. So
that's exactly right. Yeah. Yep. Good. Anyone else have anything that struck them or kind of helps answer the question for you? So what? You're not a king. You're not throwing parties, you know, but what is your kingdom? What are you responsible for? What has God given you responsibility over? And are you honoring him with that or not? You know, are there lessons that he's given you? How do you depend on him? So for me, I am a father, you know, my house is my kingdom. And is God honored in my house? Is he honored in the way that we go through our daily routines and activities, you know, and how can we as a family honor God and make sure that he's given the respect that's due him? That's kind of what goes in my my application direction for this. When God measures me as a father, I don't want to be found wanting, but I want to follow him so that I truly prosper, and a success, and in a human speaking, a successful dad. So I would start thinking of like an application statement about me and my son, or me and my daughter, or my marriage relationship, and thinking about the lessons of honoring God in those things. And here you see a father-son relationship that the message did not get passed down really well. Somehow, somewhere it went awry, and it may not be anybody's fault, but.
And along those lines, I'm thinking about my own application statement, knowing that in my family tree, there have been men who have seen God move in great ways, and they've also been some of the most colorful scoundrels you've ever known. And looking back, you know, I have to say, I know the story. I know what they've done. I know what their witness has been for God and against God. Now, what am I to do with that? How might I honor my God so that I leave a godly legacy, much like the end of Nebuchadnezzar's days?
Yeah. 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 Very, 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 very interesting. And again, the other thing to think about personally would be under the topic of idol worship. And in America, we don't think of ourselves as idol worshipers generally per se. There are some people that literally worship an idol on the shelf or whatever, statues of Mary or Buddha or something like that. But even if that's not a draw for you, if that's a draw, there's applications here for you, especially when it says wood and stone, they don't hear you. But the God who holds your breath, you don't honor. Is there something in your life that is sitting on the throne of your heart that's not God? And so is there something that's getting your honor? And Belteshazzar, you could have also said he was honoring pleasure more than God. It was a party that this was happening, and he was doing things that were not God honoring in the party. And so there's the usual suspects in American culture of what captures our hearts, and we put over God, whether it's a relationship or it's a hobby or a career or money or whatever, and we start doing and doing things because we want that, and God's considered second in that vein, or God happens on Sunday, but the rest of the week is mine. And so really then what God are you worshiping? And of course the ultimate idol is yourself, and you put yourself on there. So putting in check, giving yourself a heart check or self-evaluation check through the application statement that says something about evaluating who and what is getting honored in my life, if anything, above God. And an idol is a I heard this definition for an idol: it's anything you're willing to sin to get. And so that, then that that's superseding God. It's not that relationships and sports and cars and other stuff is bad, but when I'm willing to dishonor God or take away from God for that thing, then it's superseded God in my heart, in my spirit. So, yeah, so that's Daniel chapter 5. It's a mirror image of chapter 4. So it's another opportunity. So that's one of the a literary consideration is this is chapter 4 now, this is chapter 5. And this went one way, but chapter 5 went another way. And Daniel, the whole book of Daniel, God is most high, God is sovereign, God is in control. He puts up kings and tears them down. So we'll jump into chapter 6 next week. Next Wednesday, if you're following along at branchlife.church on our sermon series, actually chapter 6 we take 3 weeks on. It's Daniel in the Lion's Den. So last week we had part 1. This week we'll have part 2, and next week at branchlife.church we'll have part 3. So you're looking, if you're watching on branchlife.church and following along with these, you'll want week 6 will be the start of week 6. Weeks 5 is the stuff that we covered today. So when we talk about it in this class, we'll be right in the middle of chapter 5 at branchlife.church. Daniel in the Lion's Den, the most famous chapter of the book of Daniel. And we obviously dive deeper into that chapter, and there's some really specific reasons for that. And there's some really incredible applications for ancient text, modern times, Daniel in Babylon, Branch Life Church in America during COVID-19 or 2020, all kinds of incredible parallels. So if any other thoughts or comments, otherwise we'll sign off for the night. Let me say goodbye to our YouTube followers, guys. Thanks for jumping on tonight. We hope that this was encouraging you, and we'll see you next week. And don't forget to check things out at branchlife.church. We're glad you guys can stop in. If you're watching on YouTube and you haven't subscribed, we'd love for you to do that. Thanks, guys.